Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the DLC Drop podcast. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Chad Rea. He's an artist, he's a creative director, and an educator. He has an amazing story about starting off an agency life in the U.S., going overseas, and seeing a whole new way to approach clients. He's going to provide a lot of insights on starting your own business and the difference between personal art and client work. Let's talk to Chad. Drop in the untold stories of industry leaders, influencers, and insights on future innovation. I'm John Davidson, and this is the DLC Drop Podcast. All right, Chad Rea, thank you so much for joining me today on the DLC Drop Podcast. I was referred to you by our good friend Greg Neal, who I used to work with. He just joined me a few weeks back, and it's a pleasure to meet you and hear your story, and I'm excited to share it with our audience today.
Awesome. Great to be here, John. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So we had a call the other day. You gave me an overview of your career. Super interesting stuff. So why don't you tell the audience who you are and give us a synopsis of what you've been doing over the years that has brought you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I got my start as a copywriter at the Richards Group back in like 94, I think it was. And that was when Grant Richards, Stan's son, was working as a creative director. He was paired up with Todd Tilford. And I was fortunate enough to be in that group, which sort of splintered off and started Pyro, which was sort of like an agency within an agency. Cool. And we were doing, lots of youth and entertainment type clients, Hummer, Doc Martens, a ton of computer video games, like id Software, which was Doom and Quake, those sorts of things. And, I spent about 6 years there. Then I went to Mother in London, which was a new agency at the time. I think I was hire 36, and spent 2.5 years in London before I went to Amsterdam, worked at Kessels Kramer. And I think I was there for about 2.5 years. And I think it was a combination of working both at Mother and at Kessels Kramer where I was experienced a completely different way of working than I was used to in the U.S. And it really inspired me to move back to the States and set up my own shop in Los Angeles. And that agency was called 86 The Onions. Had a good run, about 5.5 years, but single-handedly ran that shop and got completely burned out. So I think it was the second time I'd been burned out in this industry. And took about a year off. Then I got a call from Wieden Kennedy, moved to Portland to be the creative director of Target. Had a short stint there, went freelance and did a bunch of consulting work. And about 6 years later, decided I wanted to teach. Actually teach again. When I had my agency in LA, I was teaching at Art Center College of Design and enjoyed that. So heard there was a position open at University of Texas here in Austin. So I applied for that gig, got that gig, and that's what brought me to Austin about 5 years ago. And I think about 8 months ago, I started working with Deco, which is a small agency here in Austin. I worked part-time as a creative director for them, and the other half of the time I'm a full-time artist.
Super cool. So you've basically been everywhere. I mean, not only have you been everywhere through the marketing agency world, but you've been all over the globe doing this. One thing that I picked out of that summary of your career is a different way of working that you discovered in Europe that you wanted to replicate here in LA. What was some of those things that was different?
Well, it sounds super dated now because it's commonplace, but in the U.S. it was very much about titles and disciplines, and if you're a writer, you stick to the words, and if you're an art director, you do the pictures, and you had all these silos within agencies. So you had, the account team determining what it is you're trying to say, the media department, where to say it. And then, that's then given to the creative team to, work within those parameters. Whereas at Mother, when they first started, they started with a kitchen table and 6 founders. And as they grew, there were more chairs and more tables added to this table. And I think when I left there after 2.5 years, this table was like 172 feet long. And, using the table as a metaphor, the idea was really about problem solving. Let's put a problem in the center of this table. Let's not worry about titles or disciplines.
Yeah.
Let's all try to collectively solve this problem. And if an art director had a great headline, or a strategist had a good headline, or the client for that matter, like, hey, let's invite the client. There's no sort of separation between agency and client. And it was also like, you weren't starting with a media deliverable, which in the U.S. that was already baked into the brief, like make us a TV commercial, make us, a radio campaign using 2 outdated, media. But
yeah.
In Europe, it was much more about like, come up with the, most relevant solution to the problem, and then figure out the most creative way to distribute it, or the most relevant way to distribute it. So anything was possible. It was like, I remember working with Harvey Nichols, which was, like a fashion department store there that's known for its window displays. And we were going to drop stuff out of airplanes. We were like, hey, can we like London? We were going to like drop, pamphlets.
Oh, wow.
Over the city. And we found out that was illegal, but that what was illegal is you could drop flower petals, but my point was like, our job was to come up with the most creative idea possible. And then we had this support team, production staff, that their job was to just go and make sure that it got done, which it was kind of a switch from like, I don't know, living in this world of like hearing no all the time, like, oh, we can't do that, that's too expensive, or what about, security, where there was just like, anything's possible.
Wow, that's really empowering, I would imagine.
It was it was like, again, as a creative, it was the most like inspiring place I could have ever imagined being, and it was at the time where just what you were calling deliverables, and saying like, oh, a book is advertising. We can make a book. Oh, we can do an art exhibition. Like that's advertising. We can make a record. Like I did a punk record, as our agency Christmas card one year.
That's sick. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just a really great, inspiring place, and being able to collaborate with so many different cultures, and like working next to a Swede and a German and an Egyptian, and all coming together with these very unique points of view and experiences, and finding what those commonalities are, and distilling the idea down to its like simplest universal truth that everybody could understand, whether it was a European campaign or a global campaign or a non-English speaking campaign. So it was fantastic.
That's really interesting. You make a great point there about the different cultures, the different perspectives, and that's pretty unique to Europe opposed to the U.S., where you have within a small proximity, you have a lot of very distinct cultures. In fact, one of the companies I work with is PRG, and they're the world's largest global entertainment provider. So I have every other week, I do an EMEA call with my counterparts in Germany. And we were actually having this very same discussion. So do you think that what happened there, the different way of working with the different perspectives, the unique way of looking at the problem and how can we solve it versus it's a commercial, it's a CD, etc., was that unique to the culture of Europe? Was that what enabled that, or were there other reasons that brought that to fruition?
I think I would credit it to the founders of Mother.
Mm.
I mean, they were really the pioneers. I think even within, other agencies within London, I think Crispin Porter gets credit for taking that type of thinking here in the States,
Yeah.
But the reality is Mother and Kessels Kramer, they were the forefathers of that media agnostic approach to problem solving. They were doing it way before Crispin was.
So I'm curious, there's a lot of benefits, obvious, from creative benefits. Did that make it really hard to scope out work or to come up with a budget for a client because it was less obvious what the the scope was?
Because, well, when I started my agency, in Los Angeles, it was based on a lot of the principles that I learned at Mother and the process for sure. And I used to charge clients a concept fee, essentially.
Okay.
So it was like, you're going to pay us to turn on the proverbial faucet, and all the ideas that come out during that time we'll certainly vet. But, if you ask us to make a TV commercial, we'll make a TV commercial. If you ask us to solve a problem, we're going to come up with a million different ways, And so at that time, it was truly sort of 360, integrated marketing. So it was like, okay, if this were executed in video, what would it be? If it were executed in radio, what would it be? If it was direct mail, if it was an experience. And you go to the client and you're just like, this is how big of an idea it is. Look at all the things that we can do here, get them really excited. Then from there, you can sort of like pick and choose.
Got it. That makes sense.
Create the media plan based on that, as opposed to like, we're allocating X to video and this to that. So, and oftentimes also that I would find that they would find money to produce things
that they're passionate about, that are good ideas. Yeah.
Otherwise,
Good point.
It's like, I remember one time we were working for a fashion retailer, and they had a very specific budget for a magazine campaign. And we were like, okay, sure, we could do a magazine campaign, but what if we took that budget? Like, we didn't think magazine campaigns were going to solve the problem. Instead, we were like, you need to do all these other things. And so you're going to get, a multitude of deliverables for the same price as, a magazine campaign. And it's going to serve you better. And I remember the guy saying, when we were doing our presentation, the client said, if I'm doing a backflip, I'll write you a check. And at the end of the presentation, I said, well, what do you think? And he says, I'm doing a backflip.
Nice.
So he got out his check and like paid for, much more than he had budgeted for.
And I think a lot of that is probably education with the client, right? Is opening up their mind to thinking beyond, yeah, you just have your budgets and silos and you're used to this, that, and the other. But hey, we know you have this money over here that's not being effective or isn't doing much for you. If we took that and we put it over here towards this punk album, this is actually going to work. And that way you can stay within budget and still fund something that is going to be much more effective for you if you think outside of the box.
I mean, that's the theory. I think the advertising industry has changed. It's gone through so many different waves and iterations. And, I think we're at a place now where clients are like, oh, well, that's great. Really, we just want a magazine campaign. Like, you're giving us all this, or,
yeah.
Or, internally, I also understand it that, marketing budgets are approved, a year in advance,
right.
So they have to be able to explain what that's going to be spent on,
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely some ways around it.
Yeah. And I would say the opportunity to do that sometimes versus never, right? I'm sure you're not saying, yeah, every time we had a client come to us, we put them in a hot air balloon and dumped flowers all over the city. or the equivalent to that. I'm sure sometimes you're doing the song, you're doing the campaign, you're doing the YouTube pre-roll in today's world, right? So it's not that you have to be one or the other. It's like, no, let's look for some opportunities with some super cool open-minded clients where we can not only effectively market a product but shift culture, which I think is something that ultimately does the best job of marketing products.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's two things. One is this idea of, creating culture, as opposed to like appropriating it,
Yeah.
and, I think in my experience in the U.S., it was very much about like, appealing to the advertising trade and winning awards, where
Yes.
I think in Europe, we were being hired as an agency to do like editorial pieces for like Dazed and Confused magazine, or when I was in the Netherlands, like Dutch magazine. Like we were actually creating, in these sort of pop culture publications, and we were being covered. Like we were having feature stories, and our advertising was being commented from people I thought meant more than the ad press. You know what I mean? Like that's the ultimate test, is if you can become a part of the vernacular, of culture. Wieden Kennedy is very good at doing that, but the other thing I was going to say is, and this is also pretty common these days, but the notion of like having like the equivalent of a tear sheet session with clients, where it was like, let's present the idea, not the work, not the execution of it, but let's present the idea. And once you buy off on the idea, when we come back with the execution, like it all supports that central thought strategy that you already bought off on, and so we would hear a lot more yeses, as opposed to going into a pitch. And I mean, I've been in pitches where they would show like 8 campaigns,
right?
And they'd be, this is the really, out there stuff. And this is the, whatever. And then the client would always pick the middle of the ground, or they would be like, I don't like the photography. I don't like that color. I don't like, the word. And it's like, no. It's about the idea. Don't worry about all that stuff. We can change that later. By removing all that and just getting to the essence of what the idea is.
Yeah.
Then it's like, when you start showing the stuff, it's like, okay, cool. We can change that stuff, but it's all laddering up to that bigger idea. And that's the most important thing.
Well, I think one of the keys to doing dope work is to getting a client to let you do it, right? And to convince them that it's worth either trying something new, being creative, thinking outside of the box, versus, every marketing director across the country and at every brand, there's many things they'll do safely that everybody's been done before. But I think you make a great point there, as far as when you agree on, hey, this is what we want people to feel when they experience your brand, right? What do we want people's emotions to be? What do we want their action to be? And then when you start there and you work your way back, you can probably get them to agree to something that is better for them and cooler for you to work on than if you start on the other end with the specific execution of the concepts, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's a little bit of hand holding, but making it less about sort of the specific execution and more about the insights, and building that bridge between, like, it's kind of like an if then scenario, like if your brand is this, and consumers think this, therefore this. Yeah. And if they follow that logic without, being distracted with, a photo or a color or a headline or, those sort of things, then that's the sort of like business marketing side of things that they really care about.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So when you learned all these things and you had your mind open to a different way of working, and you then started your own business to apply this in the U.S., I can relate a little bit. I started my own business about 9 months ago, and so I'm going through experiencing some of these things for the first time. What was that like for you to go from employee to entrepreneur and try to kind of build and facilitate this that you experienced overseas?
It's I think it's a combination of like, confidence or ego and naivety, being naive.
Sure.
And all I knew is that, every place that I've worked, I felt like I had reached the end of the like learning curve for me.
Got it. Yeah.
Like there was no more upward movement, or I wasn't able to do, what I wanted to do or whatever. And so I wanted to move on. And so it was natural progression for me to kind of start my own thing. But I think like most people, they don't know what they're doing. There is no sort of like manual for, there is, I'm sure you can, but I didn't have a business plan. I just knew that, I knew how to market myself. Mother was really great at looking at their brand. Even from the get-go, like this was in the day when people would put their founders' names on the door. Now it's about coming up with like some sort of creative agency name or whatever.
Right.
But back then it was like Mother was a brand to the point where they would remove individuals' names, out of award shows and stuff. It was like, we're all sort of a collective. And it goes back to that idea that like, just because you're listed as a writer doesn't mean you wrote the thing, or you had the idea or whatever. There's a bigger team behind this. So it just had Mother on the listing. And we were doing self-promotion pieces, editorial. I think you would fit into that, but, and creating like, this record. But we were doing so much self-promotion. And I think, again, that was a testament to Mother, like building their brand.
Yeah.
And treating Mother as a brand, or as important as any of the brands that were marketing, and so when I set up my agency, I put 9% of profits. Don't ask me why 9%. I don't know, but I was putting 9% of profits into what I would call extracurricular activities, which I never wanted extracurricular activities. It's like if you wanted to make a book, or you wanted to, have some sort of side project, like bring it in. This is what Mother did, like I published my first book working at Mother, and it had their name on it, and they were able to use it to promote their brand, but I got a book out of it, and so I was away from the U.S. for 5 years. Nobody in the U.S. knew who I was. I didn't have any clients to speak of. Like I didn't leave an agency and take a client with me. There wasn't an opportunity that like presented itself. I was just dumb enough to say, I want to, move to California and set up shop. And I've got enough money from freelancing that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to stick it out for 6 months. And if I don't get a client, then I go back to working for somebody else, and I started with one employee, me, one client, 80, 60 onions. And within 3 months, landed the first client, then another employee, another client, and in 5.5 years grew to, a 12-person shop, and, working with Fuel TV, Target, Mountain Dew, Starbucks, Aquafina, fucking Technicolor, like a bunch of really high profile clients. That was really me just looking at brands going, I want to work for them, and creating some piece of self-promotion and getting their attention, and hopefully getting some work, and then sort of supersizing clients, with that work.
Yeah, I have two questions with you about that. First one, how, as a small shop, you're going up against the Wieden Kennedys of the world. How did you find yourself be able to get the attention or say, you should work with me rather than this massive global agency? I know sometimes it's, hey, we're more nimble. Sometimes you might just, either you, the owner, or someone on your team might be a unicorn and say, look, you have access for this person to put their mind to your brand. But what was it specifically that you did that was successful in winning over these big clients?
I think it was a couple of things. One is, it was in the name. 80/60 Onions is really about like removing the layers and the formula, the marketing formulas, and just doing business as usual. And so, there was a reason for being, which was advertising, and the way agencies operate is a certain way. I'm, the antidote to that. The other thing was, our website, for example, wasn't an online brochure. It didn't have like, oh, here's our clients, here's our founders, here's our trademark process. It was like, it was the show versus say sort of model. Don't say you understand youth and entertainment culture. Be a youth and entertainment brand. And so our website was this interactive experience that people could go and interact with all these sort of weird and strange games, to the point it was mysterious enough that people would pick up the phone or send me an email wanting to know more information about us, and
interesting. Yeah.
So I think that, and just being left of center and creating, we sent out raw onions to potential clients with a letter explaining, why layers and agencies are bad. And
yeah,
I had two responses that were like, do not ever, send us anything again. This sat on our windowsill and rotted and smelled of our office, to other people going, this is exactly the kind of thinking that we want, know? And so another thing that we did is, I was doing a lot of cold calling, and excuse me. And people would say, oh, great, love the work. Call us back in 2 months. Call us back. And I was like, man, if I hear that line again, I'm going to jump out the window.
Yeah.
And so I had this idea to create a zine that would go out every 2 months to our mailing list. And it was, it had everything from, we would, just sort of like agency culture. It would showcase some of our work, but indirectly. So rather than say, hey, this is a campaign that we did for this energy drink, we ordered a case and had our intern drink the whole case, and then we monitored his heart rate.
There you go.
We didn't do that because I sent an email asking for this case of energy drink from the client, and he basically just responded, I strongly advised against doing that. So that became our entry into the zine.
No interns were injured in the making of this zine. Yeah.
No, we did all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Well, what's interesting about your approach, I think, is, there's a common term, a plumber's faucet is always leaking, right? And so there's probably a lot of, in fact, I say that all the time, there's a lot of probably agencies that their website sucks, right? And what it sounds like your approach, rather than my faucet's leaking, is no, I've got the most badass faucet in the world. Check it out. You want me to do your plumbing? Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah. I mean, it was really about let's not wait for the opportunity to create content on somebody else's behalf. Let's make what we want to make, and again, this was at the time when this 360 integrated marketing was pretty new and novel in the U.S. And so, trying to get a client to buy off on that without actually knowing exactly how it works, because they didn't have anything before it to reference. And so, it was like, because of that, like I created a record, an album, a music CD, whatever you want to call it, using PlayStation 2 sounds. And then I did an anagram of PlayStation, which was Spatial Tony, and I created this fake character, Spatial Tony, which was like a young Stephen Hawking character that only had use of his thumb.
Okay.
And he wrote this record using his thumb and created a movie trailer, ran all these ads and, did an integrated campaign for this, wacky project just to get the attention of other brands to go like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, we like that kind of thinking. Will you do that for us?
That's cool, because I think one of the struggles, especially when you're starting out, is I always say a case study is better than an idea. It's easier to, rather than telling somebody, hey, we could do this thing, it's look at what I did here and I'd love to do it for you. Now, the challenge when you're a young, new company, you don't have any case studies yet, right? And then there's also the question of spec work, because price is an indicator of quality. If you're doing a bunch of work for free, it's unlikely that you'll get paid. But I think what I'm getting from you here is if you don't yet have these case studies, you don't have this work with big brands, if you do work with your own brand, yeah, you're doing work for free, but you're investing in yourself and you're creating real case studies that people can actually respond to and then use that to show clients what you can do.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to, we're really good at marketing other brands, but we're shit at marketing our own brands. But if we looked at ourselves in the same way that we look at our clients and, really understand what our core values are and what the tone and personality is, and oh, you actually have to spend money on marketing.
Who would have thought?
And so, and if you're working with clients that have small budgets, the creative has to work harder.
Right.
And so why not do the craziest, untethered, craziest idea that you can come up with for yourself, because trying to convince somebody else to make that on their behalf, is going to be challenging. So why not be your own client, make yourself the most important client, allow yourself and your employees to work on the agency brand as much as they are, the other brands. And, it worked for me.
That's cool. Well, I have my second question here is around hiring. You talked about how you went from yourself to one person, another person, 12 people. Selfishly, I'm taking notes here. I want to learn from you here. I'm in a place where I'm at that place where it's like, okay, the first employee, who is that person? How do you strategically hire? I'm sure a lot of the audience is thinking a lot of the same things. Young agencies, starting new companies. What is your advice for when you are that single solopreneur and adding that person? What needs to be thought about or considered? What I go to in my mind is, okay, do I get the unskilled person who doesn't cost a lot, that feels a little more safe, that can just free me up to do all the other stuff? Or do I go with a top tier dude who's been doing this 15, 20 years? He's going to cost more, but that's somebody that is my same skill or greater, or both. What's your experience been?
That's a really good question, and it's extremely difficult. I don't know if I ever solved it, because it was always a challenge of, who we could afford.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is finding evangelists, people that believe in what you're trying to do. Because those people, like myself, it's funny. I made less money when I moved to London, and I made less money again when I moved to Amsterdam. And so when most people that entered the industry with me or around the time I did were like making more and more money, I was making less money, but I was more creatively fulfilled. I was going for the opportunity to basically fill my quiver, if you will, of experience that I could then cash in on, later. And so I think the people, I was fortunate, Peter Vatanatam, he's an amazing art director. He's a creative director with Honey currently. And he worked at Pyro with me in Dallas, and I thought he was one of the best designers that I'd ever worked with. And he had moved to Los Angeles, and I really wanted to work with him again. And he sold me on LA as a place to open up shop. And so fortunately he was one of the first employees, also a Swedish art director that worked at Mother, was also living in Los Angeles at the time. So those two people I had worked with before, and were so generous with their time and what I was able to pay them in the beginning. Like, I owe them so much. But I think it was just that plus teaching at Art Center. I was able to cherry pick my students.
There you go. Yeah.
And so I developed a relationship with the school, but I think, Kurt Souter, he's a mentor of mine. He founded Ground Zero. He was an executive creative director of Hal Riney, and he owns a social impact agency in Santa Monica now. Yeah. So Kirk said to me not long ago, now that I'm kind of out of, I'm not sort of like the center point anymore, or at least like I was when I had my agency. He said it's better to be the flame than it is the moth. And what he meant by that was like, don't chase after, other people and trying to get them to come to you and convince them to come to you. Create something that people want to be a part of.
That's cool.
And create this hub. And I didn't realize it, but I was like, fuck, that's what I had with 86 was we were this creative hub that like people would just show up, like people would camp out in front of the agency. There was a guy once that was busking in front of our agency saying like, we'll work. Like, I actually had an account guy because the other thing about 86 is it was all creatives. We didn't have strategists. We didn't have
project managers, account executives.
No. And the downside was that I became all of those things, but also that was part of the learning that I learned at Mother and Kessels Kramer. Was you got to learn a lot of different sort of disciplines, and
yeah.
And so there was an account guy that wanted to work at the shop, and I was like, we don't really have account managers. It's clients have sort of direct access to the people creating the work. And he's like, I'll work for free. And like, I was like, I'll take you up on that. Let's try it out, and we'll reevaluate. So all I'm really saying is if you create a culture or a mission or a body of work that people really want to attach themselves to, they will come. And I certainly had some discussions with some senior level people because I got burned out. This was part of the reason why I shut it down. But I got to a point where I was like, man, I really need some help. And now let's go after finding some partners. But all of these senior level people were like, I want 50%. And I'm like, man, for the last 3 years, I've been busting my balls, and I can't do that. I just can't do that anymore. And so it was challenging. I think if I were to do it over, I would make everybody a partner. Like, sort of like the Ben and Jerry's model, or where everybody owns a stake in the company, or at the very least, the 5 people that you want to on your team from the beginning, the founding team, give them all a carrot.
Skin in the game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that's a big challenge is the majority of employees are employees and nothing more, right? You're the owner of this small agency, and it's your life. You've put your life into it, your blood, sweat, and tears, and the people you hire are only there to get a paycheck.
Yeah.
And after 5 o'clock, they're gone. Before 9, they're not there yet. They have this, and an entrepreneur is a different type of a person than somebody who just works for somebody else. Not one is better than the other. They're just different. And I think what you're saying with creating something that people want to be a part of, you're getting people who want to be more than just an employee. They want to be part of the culture. They want to feel ownership. And that's the way that you're going to get the best work out of everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be potentially two things. The one is I guess, me as an employee, which was like, I want to go work here because I want to learn, and I know that I can take this to the next place. Like, I might make less money here, but after 2 years, I'm going to have a killer portfolio, and then somebody else is going to come and snatch me up for twice the money, kind of thing.
Right.
And I think good shops struggle with that. Like, people go to Crispin, people go to Wieden Kennedy, only stay for a couple of years because they want that Old Spice campaign or the Nike campaign. And then it's like, you can get a job anywhere, pretty much anywhere.
Right.
You can rank your own ticket. So there's definitely that, like, people who are ambitious and have a vision for their career trajectory,
Yeah.
Whether you want to be a creative director or own your own shop, it was very clear to me at a young age that that's what I wanted to do. And so that's the path that I follow. But the other thing, when I think you're talking about, why am I doing this? Why am I working 14-hour days for somebody else? If I have skin in the game, that now I know that, like, oh, I'm being groomed, or within 5 years or 10 years, I can actually be a creative director here, or I can be management, and I actually have a voice in the decision-making process. I think, who wouldn't want that, but I also think there's other people that just don't have a passion for it, that end up in these careers that will go home at 5 and they could care less really about, the outcome of the work, or
right.
if they're going to be here 10 years or not.
Right. Well, I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your personal work. You were sharing with me the other day, you went through, I think it was 100 days was it 172 paintings that you did in 100 days?
Yeah. So about 4.5 years ago, I guess. Well, I guess I should say, when I was in Dallas, this is probably 25 years ago, I had bought some raw canvas and hung it in my garage and painted some abstract painting, thinking like, oh, I want to be a painter. Painted 2 paintings. One of them was shit. The other one I thought was pretty good. I rolled it up in a tube because I had a small apartment. There was no place to hang it. It was about 7 feet by 5 feet. It went in a tube and it traveled the world with me until I moved to Austin. When I finally had the wall space in a home I bought to hang this abstract painting, which I did, and just kind of told the story on Instagram, with a picture, and an artist friend of mine said, "Did you paint that?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you need to buy more paint." Or like, you need painting, kind of thing. And so I went to the local art store, bought a bunch of paint and canvas. And this was right around the time, Trump was campaigning for the election.
Yeah.
And I was feeling all kinds of emotion. And, my day typically starts with coffee and social media.
Okay.
And, I was reading all these headlines. I would finish my coffee and then I'd go paint.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of inspiration, one way or the other, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, all of that, these abstract paintings that I were painting faces started to emerge. And they were these really sort of distraught, wide-eyed, mouth agape kind of, and so I started outlining these faces and titling them news headlines, like, of the articles that I was reading, which were all related to Trump in some way, shape, or form. And that's what I did for, 100 days. And I amassed, 172 paintings. And again, on social media, someone at GSD&M, the creative director there, saw some work and offered me my first solo show during South by Southwest. Yeah, this was probably 4 years ago, and I haven't stopped since. So, been regularly exhibiting and, yeah, really leaning into that as a career.
Wow, so that's something that really opened up that you weren't expecting. It sounds like it just was an opportunity that emerged. You kind of leaned into it as you found your way into it, and now it's something that you're doing regularly.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm half of one foot is still, in the ad world, and the other foot is in the art world. And there's certainly some differences there, but, even if I were to like go all the way back, to childhood, like I was very much an artist, and it wasn't until I got into college that I started using my brain a little bit more and got into writing, and fell into copywriting. But art, from a visual standpoint, not using words to communicate and really just kind of pushing paint around was very therapeutic, and got me using a different side of my brain. And the other thing I realized where, like if a lot of my work, because I do paintings and I do sculpture work, but some of the sculpture work in a lot of ways could be an ad, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it looks like, I could go hire somebody like, I'm a copywriter, and me and my art director come up with this idea to do a bag of AR-15 shells in a clear backpack.
Right.
And then we photograph that, and that would be a poster for some anti-gun ad.
Yes.
But instead it's like I get to build these things, and I don't have a client telling me, that they don't like it, or, what if it's bubble gum instead of bullets, or,
right.
Whatever. So yeah, in some ways I fell into it, but in other ways, I think a lot of what I've done after I shut down my agency, which was focusing more on the side hustles, because I thought, when I had 86, I would say, 90% was client work, 10% was agency work. And I thought, man, if I could reverse this and do 90% like agency, self-promotion, side hustle stuff, and 10%, service work to pay for all this. Like, I like that ratio better. And so for the last 15 years, that's what I've been working towards, so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now is, how to make a living making art and being sort of a Robin Hood, if you will.
That's really cool. That's really inspirational to me. As I've started doing this podcast, I think this is the 46th episode that we've recorded so far. And you could say either, John, you've just started, or you could say, wow, you've done 46 episodes, And as I've, podcasting is something that I never thought I'd do, but as I started doing it, I leaned into it. I was like, oh, it feels easy and enjoyable, and people respond well to it. Like, I think this could be a thing. And so that's one of the things that I'm like at the beginning of figuring out is, okay, because I work with a variety of different companies, and then I also do the podcast. And I'm personally thinking, how can I get to the point where I'm almost solely doing the podcast or content around the podcast? What is your advice for people who are trying to figure that out? It might take 15 years. Maybe you hit something and you're able to do it more early. But what's your advice to help make that happen?
It's funny because the advice that I would probably give is the advice that I haven't fully taken.
Isn't that an analogy for life?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're good at giving advice, but you've really got to lean into it 100%. I think a lot of the success stories that you hear, like on Shark Tank or, whatever, is like people are, on their last dime, when they finally had success. Like they put their mortgage on the line, like they just went for it, you know, and there was no option B, you know, there was no plan B kind of thing. And I've never quite done that, you know, or when I have done that, to be quite honest, like when I shut down my agency, there were some businesses that I started where, you know, I was just dumb. I think advertising gives you this sort of false sense of confidence. Like you go, man, I came up with the name for that brand, the logo, the packaging, the entire marketing plan, and I turned you into a $5 million company. Why? And you paid me like whatever, $50,000, you know? And so it's like, fuck that. I'm going to create an energy drink and I'm going to make $5 million, you know? And so I want to get into the IP and the product game.
Yeah.
But you quickly go, how do I source liquid?
What's a supply chain?
Yeah. All that stuff. You go like, oh man, there's so much more that goes into the product side of things that, you know, and so I was like, you know, I created this like this sustainable modular coffee table and got really excited about it and met with a furniture company. And it was the first idea I pitched. And they were like, yeah, we want to include this in the catalog. And we're going to give you a 10% licensing deal. And you have to create all these, prototypes and they're each $6,000 and like, oh, you want to have this like cantilevered ledge that's going to require a steel bar and that steel bar is going to add to the weight and that's going to add to and it's just like, I'm burning through cash, you know, learning all these things. And so it's like, man, I'm 100% doing what I want to do. And then it's like, oh crap, I'm out of money. Now I got to go back to the well and do something that I'm not really happy doing.
Right.
But I know that I'll just do that for a short term and then I'll come back. And so it's always, you know, the bar is always sliding. Like and the advice that I've also gotten was like, man, you just got to go for it. You can't have 1 foot in this thing and 1 foot in that thing. Yeah. And I've never done that, you know, and it's probably why I'm still kind of in this situation, but you know, there's definitely some good things, you know, like personally speaking for me, like, you know, in the advertising world. But the other thing too is just like, you know, if you're passionate about it, you know, and you have those ideas that aren't going away, you know, like everybody gets excited about ideas and then they kind of just go away and you forget about them. But those ideas that you're like, no, this is cool. I like doing this. And you'll figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah, I think, you know, they say necessity is the mother of invention, of course. And I think something that we all figured out about ourselves during COVID, a lot of people lost their means, you know, had to figure out how to pay the bills, right? How to get the groceries. And we realized that we are capable of much more because we had to. And my guess is that probably the reason why you've never leaned in 100%, why you haven't just completely gone for it, is because you had the option not to, right? And the people who, man, you're on your last time, I have to do this. I've been in maybe not that extreme of a situation, but I've been in some situations where a little dire, and I did more in those moments than I ever thought I could because I didn't have a choice not to. I remember one example real quick is I worked at Starbucks all the way through college. And I remember applying and saying, well, I'm definitely not going to work the morning shift because I can't be at work at 4:30 in the morning. That's not when you're waking up. That's when you have to be there. And of course I got scheduled for the morning shift. And guess what? I didn't have a problem showing up because I didn't have a choice.
Right.
And when you don't have a choice, things are a lot easier than when it's like, should I do this super hard, challenging, stressful, overwhelming thing, or should I not?
Yeah. I think a good question to ask yourself or anybody in this situation is like, what's at stake? You know, like what's the trade-off? You know, is getting up at 4:30 worth, you know, maybe not in the Starbucks case, but like if your dream requires you to get up at 4:30, Or if you know that that Starbucks job is going to give you enough money to give you enough runway to do what you really want to do, and it's a short thing, like,
Yeah.
Is that worth it? You know, is that small temporary discomfort worth the important stuff?
I love that. What's at stake? I think that's going to give our audience a good idea of how to evaluate, do I chase this dream? Do I go after this thing I've been thinking about that I haven't been able to stop thinking about? Well, this is the end of the podcast episode. I so appreciate you having us. I know we went fast, man. This is such a good conversation. I was looking at the clock. I was like,
holy moly,
we got to do a round 2. But before I let you go this time, anything that you'd like to share? Where can people find your artwork? Where can people see your shows? Anything else you'd like to share?
Well, you can go to my website, which is chadrea.com, REA. And that is mostly my art stuff, you know, but again, then sort of what I was saying, not fully being 100%. If you go down to the footer, you'll see a bunch of links to, other things that I do, whether it's, you know, the ad work, or I do voiceover work, you know, as well. And yeah, I'll just say that I recently moved from Austin to Lockhart, Texas, which is, you know, about 30 miles east of Austin, southeast, known for its barbecue.
Nice.
And I'm building a creative retreat here that people can come and visit and, you know, take classes. And it'd be great if anybody's interested in coming here and learning and being their most creative self, you know, would keep in touch.
Absolutely. We'd gladly promote that and get some folks out there. So, well, thank you so much, Chad Rea. I've learned a lot. I know the audience has learned a lot from this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today on the DLC Drop Podcast.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you for listening to the DLC Drop Podcast. This podcast is part of the Esports Futuri Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review.